So I have just watched the first 5 episodes of Hell's Paradise, and honestly, I am a little bit worried. I enjoy Hell's Paradise. When I was reading the manga, I think I made a video around about the time that it came out many years ago, and I had high expectations for it. The more it released, the more enjoyment I got out of it, and towards the ending, I kind of fell off it a little bit. I wasn't all too fond of the ending, it wasn't really up my alley, but I could appreciate the fact that the author was able to bring it to a conclusion in a satisfactory type of way. A lot of people really love the ending. Personally, not really my cup of tea, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. Since then, the author Yuji Kaku has gone on to create Ayashimon, which is out of the original magazine that he was in, which was Jump Plus, going into Weekly Shonen Jump. And Ayashimon was different and unfortunately not well received, and very quickly that story got cancelled. Since then, Kaku has been working on a new unreleased manga, I believe, and doing little bits and pieces of promotional stuff for Hell's Paradise's anime. Now I'm happy that Hell's Paradise has an anime, especially by Studio Mappa, because it's rather fitting. The community came up with a title for 3 manga called The Dark Trio, and that's a little bit on the nose, a little bit edgy. This is Kaizen, Chainsaw Man, and Hell's Paradise, and its title is quite directly the reason. These stories were a little bit darker, a little bit edgier, a little bit more on the nose, etc., right? Studio Mappa has gone on to animate all 3 of them, so the Dark Trio, or whatever you want to call them, are now completely under Studio Mappa's wings, and all of them have a different approach animation-wise. Now, naturally, you would think Jujutsu Kaisen was really good, Chainsaw Man was really good, so Hell's Paradise should also be really good. For me personally, not as much. So far, the first 5 episodes have been fine, even good in some instances, but I don't think it's anything really exceptional. And that's not to say that it has to be exceptional or revolutionary or unique or trying to push the boundary in any regard, but I think it's a fine adaptation of the source material. But as soon as you start to compare it to its predecessors or its siblings even, like Chainsaw Man or Jujutsu Kaisen, you can tell the level of quality and attention to detail is drastically different. Jujutsu Kaisen is beautiful. It is outstanding through and through, and just the response to that anime is kind of critically acclaimed. And Chainsaw Man is a little bit more diversive, but mostly because its approach is a lot more unique. You don't get to see anime like Chainsaw Man all too often because that director had all of the intention to do it their way, their vision, trying to pay as much homage to Fujimoto and Chainsaw Man as they could. So it's different to the manga of Chainsaw Man within the vision of that director, and for that I appreciate it. It was very interesting. Hell's Paradise for me currently is almost like they're playing it too safe, that they don't really want to show off all too much, and it could be because they don't have enough people working on it, they don't have enough time working on it, or they're saving it for the future. And this is where my worry or concern comes in, because its future is a lot more bombastic than the first 5 episodes that we've got, and the first 5 episodes have been pretty standard, right? And I say that respectfully because as much as I don't fully understand the animation process or even the industry, you can recognize that a lot of talented people are extremely overworked and underpaid. They don't have enough time to work on this material. You can throw a bunch of money and an iconic studio name at this series, but if you don't give the talented people time to work on it, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get anywhere. Unfortunately, this starts to sound a little bit more believable. It may or may not be the case, I'm not sure, but Attack on Titan, Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, and now Hell's Paradise are only some of their biggest projects. They have a bunch of smaller ones underneath them, but they're very close to one another, and the amount of talent I can imagine being split between all of these projects is far and few between. Once you're done working on Chainsaw Man, you're either jumping on Attack on Titan or Kaizen Season 2 or Hell's Paradise. So unfortunately, there's going to be a priority list. It's going to be either Kaizen or Attack on Titan first, because they are the biggest, most successful series that they have currently going. And Attack on Titan's anime is kind of all over the place. It's beautiful, it looks great and amazing, but its release schedule is crazy. In a sense, it's a good thing because they're able to actually have the time to work on the episodes. Kaizen is just around the corner this year, so the more I started to think about it, the more I thought Hell's Paradise kind of got pushed to the side. To be honest, before it even released, I was expecting it to be a lot worse, unfortunately. It's not the most successful manga. It's well received, it has a good fan base, but it's not revolutionary, it's not doing numbers like crazy, it's just a well-respected manga that came to a conclusion. I expect its anime to increase its popularity quite a bit, but they have a massive hurdle to get over. These 5 episodes have been interesting because there's a lot of good within these 5 episodes, a lot of great moments, a lot of character building, a lot of beautiful music, and sometimes imagery, but for the most part it seems rather bland. It's almost like they take these great slices of moments and either cut them extremely short or just have it for one scene and that's it, and then everything else is kind of just muddled up paste within there just to make it all flow together. A great example of this is a lot of the altercations within the show so far have barely been shown, and yes, the fluidity of animation is not the only thing to gauge how great an anime is, right? But its action has been oddly cut short. Every fight or action has kind of been initiated and then stopped within the same sequence. There's never really any back or forth fighting, it's kind of just happens, and if it does start to happen, you start to see the fight currently go, it cuts away from it. This isn't the most egregious thing, funny enough, you probably won't even notice it, but if you do, it's kind of funny to laugh at, because you get yourself excited to see something happen and either that thing dies instantly, which, you know, can make perfect sense within the narrative, or it leads into the idea of them going to fight and then it just cuts to the utter destruction of it. A little bit odd, but not the worst thing. I think the difficulties of this show lie much further ahead, and I can only hope that they are prepared for this, and it's the reason why these first 5 episodes, at least for me, have been pretty standard. And again, they don't have to be revolutionary. There is some great moments within here, most definitely, but it just seems very oddly bland in some sections. I've seen a lot of people talking about the background and how characters fit within it, even some weird facial expressions, yada yada. I'm not all too crazy on it. The background is something that kind of gloss over. You're not really paying attention to it, and it's kind of the biggest reason why they blur it for the most part. Like 90% of the time it's going to be blurred, and it's a little bit disappointing, but at the same time it kind of makes sense. I think if you are a person that enjoys the scenery for a lot of anime, this is one of those situations where the environment is so incredibly complex that drawing it for every single scene would be a nightmare, because they explain very clear within that show that the environment is filled with so many different flowers and things that shouldn't technically be a part of each other, yet they are. So instead, what do? So you don't have to show it, you kind of put like a weird blur over it, and sometimes it can be distracting. Now that I've told you, you'll probably notice it a little bit more and it might be a bit annoying. My apologies, but it's not the end of the world, right? What could be the end of the world is basically every fight that comes after this. See, the story at the moment is very standard. It's kind of slowly opening up and introducing you to these characters and the world and this mysterious island and the elixir of life, and while there is a lot of components that may oddly seem overwhelming, at the same time it's actually rather secluded. This isn't the craziest it gets, even though it may seem crazy. You'll notice the direction of the anime is focusing very heavily on giving you all of these characters and their backstory and their lore and just a lot of them, which is a good thing because, you know, the further you get through the narrative, the more these characters start to come together to try and survive on this island. However, much later on, these fights become very, very consistent, very bombastic, very crazy, very all over the place, more explosive than you would ever think. Trust me, everything that you have seen so far, if you combined every single action sequence you've seen so far, that would maybe equal out to one fight in a singular episode that will eventually have to happen. And you will have to do this multiple different times on every single episode. So my question, my concern, my worry is that are they prepared to really do this story justice? Because there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of things that go down. And this is completely staying away from spoilers, other than the fact that you know you're going to get fights in the future. But at the moment, you're seeing the slowest version of it, and they're kind of struggling. I don't want to say struggling because it has this negative connotation to it, but they're definitely not putting all their eggs into this show. And it could be on purpose because they're saving themselves for much later on, or they might not have the manpower to be able to do it. They might not have the talent, they might not have the time, they might be on a very short schedule to turn this show around, which would be very unfortunate. So far, I am conflicted because of it, because there is moments in here, some very specific moments that I think are beautiful, are gorgeous, that are pulled straight out of the manga, and I love it. But as soon as it's got to the island, it's kind of watered itself down more and more, and everything's very cut and dry, start and finish. There's no real oomph or emphasis behind anything. It's kind of just existing currently. Again, it's not the worst thing. It's manageable. It's palatable. You're not going to be disgusted by the show. You're not going to think it's even bad probably. You might think, oh, you know, this is fine. But I think it could be so much more. I don't know what schedule they have. I don't know if they're struggling to get this done or if they're on perfect time with it. But in a perfect perfect world, I'd love to see this show given all the time in the world to be able to do it, because it would be gorgeous. The amount of creative ways that you could showcase this environment with this beautifully vibrant color palette, all of these different creatures interacting with these criminals, it could be absolutely wild. I'm sure they know what they're getting into, and I hope that they're able to at least somewhat make it manageable for themselves. The more this story continues, the more difficult it becomes to animate, and that's kind of standard for a lot of animes nowadays, right? But Hell's Paradise is one that really ramps up over time. About the halfway point, it starts to get very much serious. You start to get big reveals, massive things, and by the end of the story, it's entirely different to what it was at the beginning. If they keep at the pace with this design that they have going now, with the first 5 episodes, they will not be able to keep up. And if they try and do it with that later stuff, it will feel extremely flat, extremely bland, and will not do any of those fights justice. I don't mean to be solely negative. I have my fingers crossed that they have a healthy workload to be able to handle a lot of this stuff in the future.